You are listening to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, episode 149, Making the Most of Short Game Sessions. In today's episode, we discuss how to make the most of your short game sessions. We discuss different strategies for making the most of these short game sessions. We also discuss what may be too short of a time for a game and other difficulties that short game sessions present. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me once again, I've got Josh. Josh, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm good right now, but I have been busy.
You've been busy? Really?
Yeah. You know, work's picking up. I've got a lot of things going on, and I just haven't had a lot of time to get to gaming.
So, if you haven't had a lot of time to get to gaming, I mean, how have you gotten your fix in?
Well, I mean, I enjoy our little conversations. They're not very long, but it does get me thinking about gaming on like a smaller viewpoint, maybe a shorter session.
The short game session. Yes. Something that I have grown quite familiar with these days myself, because I also don't have a lot of time to game, and I still want to partake in the hobby. So today we're going to be talking about getting the most out of a short game session. So,
yeah, I did think I had a lot to talk about with this because I haven't run a lot of short games. Most of my games are usually sit right at the 3 to 4 hour range, and it's been fairly rare that I've had shorter sessions than that, except in cases when, life happens. But I start writing down some notes and looking some stuff up, and it looks like there's a lot of information and some good information that I think would be helpful to people to have to run these short sessions.
yes. And again, life does happen, whether it be that, you're got to spend more time with family or, your work picks up, things like that. There's always something that's going to get in the way. And if the hobby is important to you, the best way to get through it is to find a manageable amount of time with your friends or your gaming group to get things done. Obviously, I'd say the ideal amount of time to game is probably like a 4-hour session. It's a good kind of pacing or whatever that you have there. I mean, back in the day, we used to do 8-hour sessions, but right now, doing getting 2.5 hours for a gaming session, or 2 hours for a gaming session is really kind of I'd say, the smallest increment of time that I could even see doing this. And I know that you wrote down in your notes that it is the smallest that you would go for a normal game session. So.
Yeah. Now, that's not to say like a short game session can't be less than that. In fact, there's some very good ways to make a 1 hour session or like a 1.5 hour session be very valuable and useful. But if you're going to do that, you really do need to plan it. I was looking for, how short is a short game session? And 2 hours really is the minimum for doing a normal session, where you can have your combat, your RP, you can have a normal number of players at your table. You can have some session flow planned out, but you don't really need it as much. 2 hours still gives enough freedom for players to sort of decide what they want to do. So while it can be a little railroady, it doesn't need to be. And I think if you're going for the shorter sessions than that, plan on a little bit of railroad.
It doesn't need to be railroady at 2 hours, 2.5 hours, kind of in that mark there. I mean, again, especially if you have kind of a well-defined thing going into it, like maybe you've had to shorten your sessions, but even if it's a new game, think about like for about every player at the table, you're probably going to add another 15 minutes on any scene you're going to do. So for us, any scene can take about an hour. So think about a 2 hour session getting you probably about two scenes worth of functionality. The more people that you have at the table, the longer scenes just inherently take, and the longer the combat takes. So getting a normal session there, your 2 hours might push into getting like 1.5 scenes. It kind of depends on what your group is doing, how efficient they are with different things that they do. But I would say, yeah, if you're going to do something where it's a lot more player choice, more try to do player agency and player driven, or like even mystery, things like that, where there's more intrigue involved and a lot less knowing where to go. The 2 hour session is probably the smallest increment of time that you can go. Otherwise, you're right. You got to start figuring out more railroady stuff and start thinking about how you're going to direct players in a very precise way, or at least the clues aren't very the next piece of the puzzle, or the next location that you need to drive to, is very clear to players. So that, I guess, that's when you get into less than the 2 hour session, but more than an hour long.
Yeah. I was figuring that if you're going to do like less than 2 hours, but more than an hour, somewhere in that hour to hour and a half, hour and 45-minute range, you have to plan it as a short session. You have to reduce everything to make it work and get all your players in there. And if you're going to go less than that, if you're going to go an hour or less, it's absolutely fantastic for one-on-one sessions. If you are, if a player wants to do something specific and brings it to you and says, hey, I'd like to do this thing, you plan out a thing. An hour session with a player, you can get a lot done if it's one-on-one. Even up to 2 or 3 players, you can still have a bit of fun, but it'll probably only be a scene, an encounter, maybe a little bit of role play into a combat. It'll be one focused thing.
I don't even think less than an hour can actually really work. I've tried to do different things. It's just like the way that storytelling tends to go. I think you need to have more than an hour. I think you can get away with like between an hour and 2 hours. I think once you're less than an hour, everything is super rushed, and then like just to even get, like, people have to come in so focused to make that hour work. Yeah. And if your players are really, really motivated and driven, or if you have like a single player that's motivated and driven, then you could probably get away with just eking up to about an hour. But I think that it's really, really tough, because the speed at which things kind of need to happen, and the stuff that you can get accomplished within it's sort of limited in that regard. So
yeah, that's why I'm saying great for one-on-ones, but anything more than that, it starts getting crowded. Yeah. So,
yeah, I mean,
how would you structure a short session?
So again, if you have an established game, or if you have an established way of doing something, or an established group, I mean, you can sort of, again, if you're going over the 2 hour mark, getting around 2 hours, 2.5 hours, then I'd say that you can sort of do whatever you want. You're not limited in the scope of the game. When you really start getting down to like less than 2 hours in time, you might want to start considering doing smaller stories, and start really kind of limiting the scope of what the story is, because the amount that you can actually get accomplished in a 2 hour period, like if I'm going to give you an open-ended game, for example, there's so much to be done in that game, and it sort of lends itself to a longer period of time together with the players, because it then allows the players to express more freedom, kind of work with the GM, and kind of work through things. A lot of times with shorter game sessions, GMs will focus on using like a downtime aspect to it, which is send me details on what your character is also doing, like beyond the game session. And I feel like that, I don't like that approach, because I don't think that role playing behind the scenes with the GM in a one-on-one fashion with a group of players makes any sense. I mean, because I think that some people have the time to do it and other people just don't. And then you end up with this sort of like imbalance in certain people within the group are so indispensable because they've worked so much with the GM. And then the other people are sort of just like secondary characters to what's going on there. So, I see you've got a bunch of stuff written down here, but I would say, you can definitely do a standard structure of, you're probably just going to get 2, maybe 3 scenes, depending on how how long you're running the session for. But I don't see any problem in sticking with kind of the same formula that got you there. Maybe try and plan out which scenes you want to execute. So if your players are going to walk into something like, a dungeon and it's going to have multiple combat encounters, and there's going to be some story exposition at the end, if they come into that as their second scene, maybe just stop the game there and pick it back up the next week so it's all fresh and you're able to tackle everything in that one singular session.
Yeah, yeah, you could. Um, I like to think of using some of these short sessions to not fill in the gaps, because downtime stories, as fun as they are, they shouldn't really affect your world. They should be just like bonuses for characters that have time to do that. The other option, and I have used this sort of thing before, or I've rather been on the receiving end of this before, is when I have not been able to make a session, and they count me out for that session, and then I play a catch up like little thing with the DM, and that helps keep me at the same level as everybody else. So that could be useful also for short sessions. And I think that if you're going to be running anything that's going to be short, you've got to follow, like under that 2 hour and above. Yeah, you probably can still get by with your normal design. Don't mess with the formula that you've been going so far. Keep things so your players are familiar with it. But if you're going to have to go under that, let them know beforehand, hey, we only have a short period of time, so we're going to do things a little bit different to make sure that it goes quicker. It's more focused. It's more, the scope is small, but it can be focused in the right direction. I was looking up some different things, and a lot of recommendations on short sessions that if you're going to be running them, even like a regular basis, or if it's going to be that, start your players off fresh. Start them, if you can, start them off with everybody rested and ready. And you focus on if it's going to be short sessions throughout your game, like if you only have an hour and a half, you're playing at lunch, right? And that's the time that everybody's got. They've got their lunch session to play. And maybe you can do a couple of sessions a week if you're doing it that way, but like each session is short. Then maybe you should focus on getting players with simple characters and characters and roles that they're familiar with, things that aren't overly complicated, that's not going to slow things down. I've got it listed elsewhere in here. Try and avoid pets. Characters with pets means that you've got a whole nother pack of actions in a combat that's just going to be like bogging down your time.
Simplicity in the characters helps for short sessions because your characters in a longer game context will probably have motivations, or they should. Not all do, but if they don't have motivations, then a short session can really work really well because the characters are very one-dimensional. And so it's like, again, you got Fightor from the land of Fightors, and, they're really good at fighting. So,
the fire mage that knows how to shoot fire and not 700 spells. Yeah. It can be a lot easier to deal with a quick session where your players know all the things that they can do, have, no external motivation, or few external motivations other than what the story is at hand, so that they keep focused on the story that you're planning on telling them.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, like again, it again trying to stay connected. Also, one other thing too is even if this is a an existing story or anything else, try and limit the chit chat outside of the game to a minimum. You really want the players to stay focused to what they're doing in terms of playing the game. A lot of times in a longer session, there will be a lot more like, oh, hey, this thing happened at work. And that's inevitable, but trying to stay really focused on the gaming aspect of it to get the most out of your session is really, really important.
Yeah. And I think that also goes, keeping players focused is also part of how you're going to start your session. If you're going to be running a short game, have a goal for that session planned. Your players should know within the first couple of minutes what is going to happen in this game. Now, I don't think that you should drop your players like that classic, you're in a bar, figure it out on your own, or like you're walking down the road and something's going to eventually happen, but give the players some time to get used to it. No, they should jump right into, a crazy man with a big old beard is screaming at you about trolls dragging his wife off into the hills, and you've been charged with going and getting. You start with a plan. You give them a course, an action, all the motivation as soon as you can, so that they can get to the meat and potatoes of the story.
Yeah, you don't want your players sitting around picking their butt in a tavern, trying to figure out like what to do next. Okay, you don't. I mean, that doesn't mean that you can't have intrigue in a short session based game. That doesn't mean that you can't have a really well developed story in a short session based game. But you can't have your players. It can't just be entirely player motivation driven to figure out the next pieces of the puzzle. Again, if you want the players to do that sort of scene, that works, but understand that that's going to eat up about an hour of your session as your players sit there. And if the players have no direction, they're going to sit there for longer. So that could be 2 hours, your entire session's gone about your players just thinking about what they want to do. And the chances are that they actually figured out what they want to do by the end of that, probably pretty small. And they're going to come back next week and they'll be sitting in the same exact effort trying to figure out what to do next.
Yeah. And absolutely, you could have, mystery and intrigue or even more complex stories. But if you've got like this big intro planned, consider not playing it. Like, so let's say you're doing the classic Curse of Strahd, right? And you've only got these hour and a half lunch sessions that you're doing this on. Well, that whole opening about how they get to Barovia or whatever the hell is going on, make it a handout, write it up as a story, and have it handed out to them, so that that first session, when they first sit down with their characters and ready to play, they're already there and ready to have that adventure. Handouts are fine for short sessions, because it gives that lead in that they can look at before they get to the table. So they know what their motivation is. So you don't spend a lot of your time sort of explaining those painstaking details that the players may not be paying attention to or may not catch while you're saying it, but they've got that handout so they can, look back at it later, see how it ties into the world of the story that you're giving them. And it keeps your players focused, it keeps your session focused, and it gets you right into the action as quick as possible.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Give along that same line in a shorter game session, don't be afraid to give your players the information. I've said that many times before on the podcast, and in several episodes. But you need your players to be privy to almost everything that's going on, because you want them to be able to make informed decisions about where they need to go next. Again, the intrigue can be there, but that's sort of like the intrigue of, well, the amount of information that you give them should be intriguing to them. Like, we want to go take a look at this. We want to go take a look at this. We want to go take a look at this. They have direction to go within the story itself. So there's no sitting around going like, well, I don't know what to do next. Like, well, we need some coin, so maybe we'll sell grain. I don't.
Yeah. Well, and the goal of a session does not need to be the end of a story. If you have a mystery or if you've got adventure that has a number of different tasks that have to be accomplished in whatever order, doesn't need to be a specific order, it could be all at the same time. You can keep those sessions to just like little arcs, like complete one thing, and now you've got these other things the next time we have a session. And if you could keep it focused to finishing the one object or like accomplishing something, your players are still going to feel like they got something out of a session, that it wasn't wasted. It's a motivation to keep going, but it's also that sense of accomplishment that, hey, this wasn't a wasted session. And that's all about that, keeping these sessions focused.
Yeah, laser focus on the sessions. You're right. The choice about coming in with a goal for your session is really, really effective. Even if you're doing something a little bit more open-ended where your players have more agency within the session, the goal should be to get them to acquire a new piece of information, or the goal should be to get them through a combat within the session. You don't want to leave them dangling. The hardest thing to do in a small session is you can't finish the scene, and then you got to come back next week. So you're already like, it's already a hard thing for most GMs to work through is you end in a really bad spot. Like, you're in the middle of a dungeon and you're like player 3 is attacking the harpy and you're like, we ran out of time. All right, time to pack it up. We'll just remember that here, and then we'll come back to it. Like, it doesn't work as well. So
yeah.
Just you really have to stay on top of those things.
Yeah, I think if you're going to be having a short session, especially with different objects or tasks you're going to be accomplishing, you have to. Combat is a big time waste. It takes a lot of time in combat, so combat encounters should be designed with that in mind. Like I said earlier, avoid pets. The more things that have actions, the longer it's going to take to get anything done. Combat encounters probably shouldn't be your players versus an army, because that's also going to take forever. Keep the encounters small, focused. You should keep your players moving around in non-combat scenes. Don't let focus stick with one player for too long, because it's just taking up more time. Try and move it around to different people so everybody gets a little chance to do something. You don't have much time. Everybody's going to share.
You want to get your players moving as a group in a small session. You don't want them splitting the party. Is a great way to screw up an entire small session, because now you have to divide the precious little time that you have to looking at group A or group B or player 1, 2, 3, 4, who all split up and did their own thing. The small sessions really tend to work better by making it so your players drive and work together. And what the best way to address that problem and not split the party is to make sure that you don't present the players with where it feels like the only option is to accomplish two things at once. Okay, like it's really, really important that does not feel imperative to players. Like being able to stress a time crunch on players is one thing, but one that is so bad that the players decide that we're going to try to go tackle like 7 things at once. That's awful, because then now all you've done is you've made it now everybody gets like 10-minute turns, and then the session's over. Like goodbye. Like so you got to play for 10 minutes and nobody else got to play in the group. And you're right about combat. Combat really needs to be quick and laser focused. Go back to improving combat. Go back to any of the other topics that we talked about, doing mass combat, all that other stuff. The key is to get the combat flowing and moving quickly. Don't worry about executing 100 attacks and the 14 legendary actions that you've given this one monster. Okay, like don't worry about all the minutia, and for the love of God, get your turn order like really really streamlined. Know whose turn it is next. Don't be wasting your time rolling for monsters. Have those rolls done long before their turn ever comes up, so your monsters are like boom boom boom, we're done. Okay, now it's the player's turn. Like move the combat along quickly.
We talked about this earlier in avoiding math and accounting. Was, if you want to, it's not a bad idea to use average rolls for your monsters, so you're not rolling anything. Just make things happen. You don't have to go through all of that extra work and calculating out things and rolling dice and figuring. Just use average stuff for the bad guys. Let your players get all the fun of big hits or low lows. And in any sort of short game session, I do recommend I plan a wrap up. Plan, you have a short period of time. Plan a couple of minutes at the end to sort of wrap up what was done during that session to make sure your players know that they did accomplish something. And if you have, a series of these short sessions, if your whole game is these short sessions, great, because you're going to use that time to let them know what the motivation is for the next session, so they can jump right in on the next session. It keeps the focus going session to session. Have a little bit of time to wrap it up. I mean, that's probably a good idea, even in a longer session, is to take some time at the end to wrap up what happened.
Yeah, you want to end on a good location. Again, you don't want to end in the middle of the combat in the dungeon. Okay, you never want to do that in any sort of session. The other thing too is take a note, right when you are done and your players leave the table, you need to sit down for 5 minutes and write a recap of that session. Well, it's fresh in your mind that you can deliver to your players the next time they come in. So they know immediately what they were doing, what happened, and like they know what to do. They're right back in it. They're not trying to remember, like, did we talk to Old Man Thornton or did we not?
Yeah. And I think throughout the whole thing, you just have to pay attention to time. This is, you've got a limited amount of it, so you need to make the most of it.
Yes. Yeah. No. The time is your ally and your enemy here. I mean, like, again, you found and devoted and found people who are willing to devote an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to this gaming hobby here, and your time is really really precious in a short session. You got to make the most of it. You don't want to spend an hour and a half talking and catching up and having a great time. Like, I mean, again, that's a great thing to do with friends, and then you only have like 30 seconds, and you don't want to spend an hour in the game trying to figure out, like, well, are we going to forge the river, or are we going to like
I think it's ford the river.
Ford the river. Okay, ford the river.
You forge it with a hammer and an anvil.
Are we going to build a river? Are we going to build a bridge? Or
going to heat it in the fires of Mount Doom and make a river? No. No. And I know we've been talking a lot about how to speed sessions up, but, and I'm gonna put this out here as a possibility. Some of us over prepare, and we may prepare for a short session and get your players moving so quickly that what you've planned for a 2-hour session or like an hour and a half session gets done in 45 minutes. And now your players are sitting there with a whole bunch of time wondering, what are they supposed to do? So when I say pay attention to time, you should pay attention to time in both directions. You should get your players moving, keep the focus by providing them what they need, not necessarily what they want, but like, don't make the players jump through hoops for random things, but like you have a plan, where it's supposed to go, make it work. But if the things are going too quickly, if you get a combat encounter and they just steamroll it with good rolls, great. Have some roadblocks that you can throw up. I'm not saying that you should be putting random encounters for random encounter's sake. I'm not saying anything like that. But you had a mystery that was 2 steps stupider. Maybe take it back. Make it less stupid, just for a moment, just to give them, a little bit more to work for. Plan on having options for these sessions. If things start going too quickly because you are at a time crunch, and you're like, I don't know if it's going to feel like a full session, give them something to accomplish. And then if it's taking too long again, make it work. You can play with the time this way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, which is, have ways to add and pad in time if things have gone too fast. One of the most challenging things as a GM is, and I guess what separates, what makes for really good GMing is understanding the time, like the clock, and knowing like how long things have taken, knowing when to push your players to move faster, and knowing when to pull them back and slow them down. And being able to do that seamlessly as though your players are not really aware of any of that. So like if your players are moving too quick through something, then maybe I'll let them bicker more. Okay. And I'll let them, commiserate amongst themselves and try to think of the next plan. But when that stalls out, I know when to start pushing them towards the next thing, and I know how to intrigue them and entice them into the next piece. One of the things that I can say through the combat piece here, which is, make combat small, yes, but combats are better off if you start them small, and you can always add more combatants to a combat. It's much harder to subtract the combatants without killing them. So, because, if all of a sudden like 600 goblins show up and now you're fighting the army of goblins, and, this is turned into a slogfest where you're just slaughtering goblins left and right, and there's just hundreds of them. They keep popping up. Like, try to explain how you're going to stop that combat and have the 450 goblins walk away. Okay, they're not going. Why would
they walk away? Right?
Why would they walk away?
Why would they walk away? Your paladin just pulled up what he thought was going to be a wheel cart because he was trying to hide. Turns out under that cloth was an auto ballista that is just going to take out half the army in a turn. It's great. No, that's crap. You don't do that. Okay, we're better than that, Josh. Yes, don't do that. I think that part of paying attention to time is planning it out. You talk about planning a session. You talk about having a goal. You talk about having, sort of an understanding of how things are. Block out your time. Plan for a combat session. Plan out a puzzle. Plan out some RP. Plan up that the wrap up, and look where you are in your timeline, so that you can add or remove time as necessary. Combat is a great place to add time because combat is slow anyway. They're fighting the 3 harpies and they're just demolishing them. One of them will scream out, and some more guys run into the room to help. And now, there's less combat in the next session because you're pulling those guys from there. Don't just add guys to be adding guys. Make it work. Make it make sense for whatever's happening. But then you can also, you've got other things that can still happen in there. You've got puzzles, you've got role play, you've got NPC interactions for exposition. They could even have treasure, so have to sort things out. That can take time too. So just plan each one of those things as a block and see where you are in your time as you're going through them to see what needs to be added and what needs to be removed. And don't like hold yourself to doing all of the things all of the time. As long as your players reach that goal, that intended goal for the session, that's really what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, no, it's well said, Josh. Do you have anything else you want to add to the subject?
No, I think we've been talking too long.
Yeah, no. Let's keep this one short and concise. Your time is valuable to us. So, if you have any thoughts on running a short game session, if you have run short game sessions yourself, maybe your group is limited on time, let us know how you do it. Level Up Your Gaming Podcast at gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. Also, we are on YouTube, so go ahead and smash the like button there. Subscribe to the podcast there if that's your medium for listening to it. Otherwise, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast site. Review the podcast and recommend it to a friend. All those good things. And that'll wrap us up for the week. So for Josh, I'm Aaron. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.